Ever catch yourself just watching someone and you're like, what in the world is going on in their head?
It's like you're trying to read their mind.
Totally. And it turns out that this whole mind reading thing, it's not as simple as it seems. It's this wild product of evolution. And today we're taking a deep dive into how it all works or doesn't with Simon Baron-Cohen and his work on mind blindness.
Oh, Baron-Cohen. His work is brilliant. When you really think about it, this ability we have to figure out what others are thinking and feeling, it's so deeply ingrained in us that we just take it for granted.
Right. Like it's just second nature.
Exactly. But Baron-Cohen's work, it really forces you to step back and appreciate the incredible complexity of it all.
Yeah, it really makes you think. One of the things he talks about is this idea of Machiavellian intelligence, which basically suggests that those primate brains of ours, especially human brains, they didn't just evolve to like find food or build a fire. They evolved to navigate this whole intricate web of social interactions.
It's like our ancestors were constantly engaged in this high-stakes game of social chess.
Okay, social chess. I like that. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about it. To succeed in a game of chess, you can't just react to your opponent's moves, right? You have to anticipate their next move, maybe even the move after that.
And you have to try to figure out what their overall strategy is.
Exactly. You have to try to get inside their head and understand their intentions. And that's what Baron-Cohen argues our brains are doing all the time in social situations. We're trying to decode not just what someone is doing, but why they're doing it. What's their end game?
And being able to do that well, to accurately predict those intentions, Baron-Cohen thinks that was more important for our ancestors' survival than physical strength.
Absolutely. Think about it. Cooperating with others, forming alliances, outsmarting rivals, these were all essential skills for surviving and thriving in these complex social groups.
And for passing on those genes to the next generation.
Precisely. Those who are adept at reading social cues, anticipating threats, and building strong relationships had a definite advantage.
It makes you wonder, are we still hardwired for that same level of social complexity? Even if the stakes aren't quite as high as, avoiding a saber-toothed tiger attack on our way to the grocery store.
Right. I mean, I don't think I'd be that good at outsmarting a saber-toothed tiger.
Me neither. But that's one of the really interesting questions Baron-Cohen digs into. And to help us understand how this whole mind-reading thing actually works, he breaks it down into 4 key mechanisms. 4 mechanisms. Okay, now you've got me really intrigued. Let's unpack those. What's the first one? 4 mechanisms for reading minds. That's pretty high-tech, right? Almost like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it? But it's happening in our brains all the time.
So where does it all begin? What's the first mechanism that gets this whole process going?
Baron-Cohen calls it the intentionality detector. Or ID for short, because who wants to say that whole mouthful, right?
ID it is.
So this ID, it's basically the part of our brain that's always on the lookout for agents.
Agents. Like secret agents.
Well, not exactly, though that would make things pretty exciting.
Yeah.
No, when Baron-Cohen says agents, he's talking about anything that seems to be moving with a purpose. People, animals, even that robot vacuum cleaner that's bumping around your living room.
Oh, okay, got it. So it's not just about movement. It's about movement that seems deliberate. Like there's a goal behind it.
Exactly. Like imagine hearing a rustle in the bushes.
Oh, okay, I sense where you're going with this.
Our brains don't just think, oh, something's moving. They immediately kick into this mode of, what is it? And what does it want? It's this primal instinct, trying to make sense of the actions of others, especially if those actions could mean danger or a tasty meal.
Which, for our ancestors, those were pretty important things to figure out quickly. But it's not just about what we see, is it? I mean, our eyes, they play a huge role in all of this, don't they?
You're spot on. Baron-Cohen calls the second mechanism the eye direction detector, EDD for short. And it's all about figuring out where someone's gaze is directed, which, as you can imagine, tells us a lot.
Oh, for sure. You can tell so much about what someone's thinking or feeling just by watching their eyes.
Exactly. I mean, think about how much you can gather about a person just from a quick glance.
Yeah, and Baron-Cohen's saying there's actually a specific mechanism for that.
Yep. It's not just random. Our brains are wired to detect and interpret those eye movements. And EDD, it goes even deeper than just recognizing the direction of someone's gaze.
Oh, how so?
Because EDD, it helps us understand that the person actually sees what they're looking at.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this right. If I see you looking at, say, that apple over there.
That delicious-looking apple.
Yeah, it's a delicious-looking apple.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't just register eyes on apple. It goes a step further, using this EDD to infer that you actually see and perceive the apple, just like I do.
Exactly. It's like our brains are laying the groundwork for shared understanding, recognizing that others have their own experiences and perspectives.
Wow, okay, that's amazing. But it doesn't stop there, does it? There's more to this mind reading story.
You're right. It gets even more interesting. Next up is the shared attention mechanism, SAM for short.
Shared attention. Okay, now we're talking. What's happening in our brains when we share attention with someone like that?
Well, SAM is what allows us to know that we're both focused on the same thing at the same time. You know those moments when you make eye contact with someone while you're both looking at something and you just know you're sharing that
Oh,
experience?
yeah, absolutely.
That's SAM at work. It's like our brains are in sync.
And that feeling of shared attention, it's like this little invisible thread that connects us, wouldn't you say?
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
And it highlights how crucial EDD, that eye direction detector, is for all of this. We need to be able to track someone's gaze to figure out where their attention is focused. And then our brains do this incredible thing where they actually try to align our attention with theirs.
It's like our brains are constantly striving to be on the same wavelength.
Precisely. And that brings us to the most sophisticated mechanism of them all, the theory of mind mechanism.
Which Baron-Cohen, of course, shortens to Tom. So what is this Tom? What can you tell us about this final piece of the mind-reading puzzle?
Tom is what allows us to grasp something truly remarkable, that other people have their own thoughts, beliefs, desires, knowledge, even false beliefs that can be totally different from our own.
Wait, so it's one thing to understand that someone sees the apple, thanks to EDD, but Tom Yomo takes us into this whole other realm of understanding that they might have beliefs about that apple that aren't even true.
That's exactly it. Tom requires our brains to juggle multiple perspectives simultaneously.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. We have to hold our own understanding of a situation in mind while also considering someone else's, even if those understandings completely clash.
Wow, that's some serious mental gymnastics. And this makes me think about Baron-Cohen's work with autism. Didn't he suggest there might be a connection between autism and this idea of mind blindness?
He did. His research led him to the hypothesis that autism might be linked to difficulties with Sam and Tom in particular.
So someone with autism might not have trouble understanding that, say, a person wants that apple we were talking about.
Right, they get the wanting part just fine.
But they might struggle to grasp that the person believes the apple is poisoned, even if it isn't.
That's a great way to put it. To investigate this further, Baron-Cohen used something called the Sally Ann test. Have you heard of it?
I have, yeah. It involves dolls, right?
It does. In the test, one doll, Sally, she puts her marble in a basket. Then, when Sally isn't looking, another doll, Anne, she moves the marble to a box. The big question is, where will Sally look for her marble when she comes back?
And a child who understands the concept of false beliefs, they'll say that Sally will look in the basket.
Right, because that's where Sally thinks the marble is, even though the child knows it's really in the box.
Exactly.
And what Baron-Cohen found was that many children with autism, they had a tricky time with this test.
Suggesting that maybe this whole idea of false beliefs, of understanding that someone can have a belief that doesn't match up with reality, that can be a real stumbling block.
Right. It provides a really interesting window into how their minds might be approaching social situations. And it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. It's so important to remember that autism is complex. It's not as simple as saying someone with autism can't read minds. Baron-Cohen's work doesn't say that at all.
Not at all. It just highlights that there might be some key differences in how their brains process social information. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it makes you think about social interaction in a whole new light for everyone, not just those with autism.
Right, like, are there different levels of mind-reading ability?
Exactly.
Could some people be just naturally better at picking up on those subtle social cues?
It's a question that Baron-Cohen tackles head-on, and it's one we'll be digging into more as we continue exploring his work. But before we move on, we can't forget about those eyes. Remember how we were talking about the power of eye contact?
Oh, yeah. The eyes, they say so much without us even having to say a word.
Exactly. And Baron-Cohen, he's convinced that our eyes have this whole language of their own.
It's true. A raised eyebrow here, a sideways glance there.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much we can communicate without ever opening our mouths.
And Baron-Cohen, he dives headfirst into this whole world of nonverbal communication. He pulls examples from literature, from poetry, even everyday life, to show just how much we're saying with our eyes.
It really makes you wonder, are we even using the full potential of eye language? It's like this whole other world of communication that's right there, but are we really tapping into it?
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it?
Mm.
And it leads us to some even bigger questions.
Mhm.
That Baron-Cohen's work raises questions about the very nature of this whole mind-reading business.
Mhm.
Where did it come from? Why do we have it? And what does it really mean for us as humans, for our evolution, and for our relationships with each other?
It's like our brains are these incredible prediction machines, constantly trying to stay one step ahead of everyone else.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how unique are we in this ability? I mean, what about other species? How much can, say, a chimpanzee really understand about what another chimp is thinking or feeling?
Yeah, do they have anything close to this whole theory of mind thing that we humans are always going on about?
It's a question that's sparked a ton of research. I mean,
Sure.
some studies suggest that chimps can definitely pick up on basic intentions like, oh, that chimp wants that banana.
Right, like they can understand goals and desires.
Exactly. And some studies even show chimps engaging in what looks like deceptive behavior, like they're trying to trick each other.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, so it definitely makes you wonder. But when it comes to whether that means chimps have a full-blown theory of mind like humans, well, that's still up for debate.
It's a fascinating thought, though. Like, how did this mind reading ability even evolve? Did it happen gradually across species? Or was there some kind of tipping point, a big cognitive leap that set humans on this path?
Now, that is the million-dollar question.
Right. We could do a whole other deep dive on that one.
Absolutely. But for now, let's shift gears a little and talk about some of the potential limitations of mind reading.
Okay, limitations, got it.
One of the big questions Baron-Cohen raises is this: can mind blindness be overcome?
That's a huge question, especially for folks with autism and their families. Like, is it possible to bridge that gap to actually develop those mind reading skills later in life?
Baron-Cohen explores this idea in detail, and he brings up a really fascinating case study, Temple Grandin.
Oh, Temple Grandin, I've heard of her. She's an animal scientist, right?
She is,
Yeah.
and a renowned author and advocate for autism awareness.
Yeah.
Her story is really remarkable.
I can imagine. To achieve what she has, despite the challenges that often come with autism, it really challenges those assumptions that mind blindness is some insurmountable obstacle.
Exactly. I mean, Grandin herself is very open about her struggles with social interaction.
Yeah.
But then you look at what she's accomplished, and it's clear that she's found ways to adapt and thrive.
It's like she's taken this incredible, almost anthropological approach to understanding social behavior. Like, she might not inherently pick up on those subtle cues in the same way that, say, a neurotypical person might, but she's found her own way to decode those interactions.
Which brings up a crucial point that Baron-Cohen emphasizes. There's probably a whole spectrum of mind-reading ability, even among neurotypical people.
That makes sense. Some people just seem to have this knack for reading a room, you know? Like, they can just sense those unspoken dynamics.
Exactly. While others might struggle with those subtler cues.
And it makes you wonder, is that just a personality thing? Or are some people just wired to be more socially perceptive?
It's a fascinating question,
Oh, yeah?
and one that Baron-Cohen believes we need to explore further. He argues that we need better tools for actually measuring individual differences in empathy and mind-reading skills.
So it's not just about whether you can pass the Sally Ann test?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there's this whole range of social understanding out there,
Hmm.
and figuring out how to measure those differences. That could be key to improving social interaction for everyone.
I love that. Imagine a world where we could better understand not only our own social strengths and weaknesses, but also those of the people around us. That could be a game changer for communication and empathy.
Couldn't agree more. It's about embracing that neurodiversity. And ultimately, I think that's what Baron-Cohen's work is all about. It's this powerful reminder that as much as we think we know about the human mind, we still got so much more to learn.
This whole deep dive has been incredible. We've journeyed into the deepest recesses of the brain, explored the very roots of our social intelligence, and even questioned the nature of perception and understanding itself.
And I think most importantly, we're left with a sense of wonder and curiosity about this whole mind-reading business.
I know I am. If there's one big takeaway from Baron-Cohen's work, it's this. We're all, in our own unique ways, trying to crack the code of the human mind. We're constantly sending and receiving signals, trying to bridge that gap between our inner world and the inner worlds of others.
Beautifully put. That's what it all boils down to, isn't it? That longing to connect.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, here's a final thought. The next time you're interacting with someone, take a moment to really pay attention. Notice those little cues, those unspoken messages flickering across their face and their gestures, even in their silence. You might be surprised by what you discover. This has been The Deep Dive, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration into the mysteries of the human experience.